The antiseptic smell of the hospital hallway still clung to my clothes as I fumbled with my keys at Dad's front door. My hands were shaking, not from the October cold, but from what I'd just witnessed through his hospital room window. I'd arrived 20 minutes early for our scheduled visit, hoping to surprise him with his favorite crossword puzzle book, when I saw my sister Elena leaning over his bed, whispering urgently while pointing at legal documents spread across his dinner tray. The image burned in my mind, Dad's frail hand hovering over the papers, Elena's mouth moving rapidly near his ear, and the way she quickly gathered everything up the moment she spotted a nurse approaching. I ducked behind the doorframe, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what I'd seen. Those weren't medical forms. They were too thick, too formal, with the distinctive letterhead I recognized from Dad's estate attorney. Before I share this shocking experience, please show your support with a like and subscribe. Comment your location below. My name is Margaret Owens. I'm 54 years old, and I never imagined I'd be telling this story about my own family. For the past 3 months, since Dad's pancreatic cancer diagnosis, I thought Elena and I had been working together to make his remaining time as comfortable as possible. She's 2 years younger than me, unmarried, and has always been Dad's favorite. Something I'd accepted long ago without bitterness. What I couldn't accept was the possibility that she was using his vulnerable state to manipulate him. Inside Dad's house, everything felt different now. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me. Images of Christmas mornings, family vacations, graduation ceremonies where Dad beamed proudly at both his daughters. I sank onto his worn leather recliner, the same chair where he'd taught me to balance checkbooks and helped me with algebra homework 35 years ago. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the grandfather clock's steady ticking. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband David. "How's Dad today? Still coming to dinner Sunday?" David Owens had been my anchor for 26 years, the steady voice of reason when my emotions ran wild. He'd been incredibly patient during Dad's illness, taking on extra household responsibilities so I could spend more time at the hospital. If anyone could help me think through what I'd witnessed, it was him. But first, I needed to talk to someone who knew Elena as well as I did. I scrolled to my contacts and found Patricia Chen, my closest friend since college, and the one person who'd observed our family dynamics for decades. Patricia had been there through Elena's rebellious teenage years, her string of failed business ventures, and the complicated relationship she'd always had with money. More importantly, Patricia had no filter when it came to calling out behavior she found questionable. I stared at Patricia's number, trying to organize my thoughts. How do you tell someone that you suspect your sister of financial elder abuse? The words felt too heavy, too serious. Maybe I'd misinterpreted what I saw. Maybe Elena was just helping Dad organize his important papers, being the responsible daughter she'd claimed to be since his diagnosis. But the memory of her body language haunted me. The way she'd leaned in close, the urgency in her gestures, how quickly she'd hidden the documents. In 40 years of knowing my sister, I'd learned to recognize her manipulation tactics. She'd perfected them on our parents as teenagers, convincing them to increase her allowance while mine stayed the same, talking her way out of consequences that I would have faced for identical infractions. The afternoon light was fading through Dad's kitchen window as I finally worked up the courage to call Patricia. She answered on the second ring, her familiar voice immediately comforting. "Margaret, how are you holding up, honey? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Have you noticed anything strange about Elena's behavior lately? Anything that seemed off?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Why do you ask?" I told her everything. The scene at the hospital, the legal documents, Elena's secretive behavior over the past few weeks. As I spoke, Patricia made small sounds of concern, the kind of noises that confirmed my worst fears. "Margaret," she said carefully when I finished, "I didn't want to worry you while you're dealing with so much, but Elena called me last week asking questions about your financial situation. Specifically, she wanted to know about David's retirement savings and whether you and he were set for life, as she put it." The room seemed to tilt. "She what?" I thought it was odd, but I assumed she was just concerned about making sure everyone was okay if something happened to your dad. Now, hearing this, Patricia's voice trailed off. My chest felt tight. Elena had been gathering information, building some kind of case. The legal documents I'd seen weren't just estate papers. They were ammunition in a campaign I hadn't even known was being waged against me. "There's something else," Patricia continued reluctantly. "When I wouldn't give her specific details about your finances, she made some comments about how you and David didn't need Dad's money as much as she did, and how it would be more fair if the inheritance reflected everyone's actual circumstances." I closed my eyes, feeling the last of my hope drain away. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. Elena had been planning this, possibly for weeks. She was systematically working to convince our dying father that I didn't deserve my share of his estate, using my husband's stable income as justification for her manipulation. The grandfather clock chimed 6 times, each note echoing through the empty house like a funeral bell. I thought about Dad lying in that hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy, trusting the daughter who'd always known exactly what to say to get what she wanted. But what I discovered next changed everything. The weight of Patricia's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I sat in Dad's empty living room, staring at the family photos on the mantel, trying to reconcile the Elena in those pictures with the woman who was systematically dismantling my relationship with our father. "Patricia, I need to see those documents again." I only caught a glimpse before Elena snatched them away. "How do you plan to do that? Elena's not going to just hand them over." I thought for a moment. "She always leaves her purse in Dad's room when she goes down to the cafeteria for coffee. She's territorial about staying with him, but she has this routine around 4 o'clock every day." "Margaret, are you sure about this? Going through her things?" "She went through my financial information with you. She's manipulating our dying father. I think I'm past worrying about privacy boundaries." The next afternoon, I positioned myself in the hospital corridor, watching Elena's predictable routine unfold. At exactly 4:15, she kissed Dad's forehead and headed for the elevator, leaving her oversized leather purse hanging on the back of the visitor's chair. I slipped into the room. Dad was dozing, his breathing shallow but steady. The morphine kept him comfortable, but made him sleep most of the day now. I felt like I was betraying him by sneaking around, but Elena had forced my hand. Her purse contained the usual items, but tucked in a side pocket was a manila folder. My hands shook as I opened it. The first document made my stomach drop. It was a new will, dated just 3 days ago, leaving Elena the house, the business, and 90% of Dad's assets. I was mentioned only as receiving his old pocket watch and $5,000. But it was the second document that made me gasp aloud. It was a letter in Elena's handwriting, apparently never sent, addressed to a lawyer downtown. In it, she detailed her strategy for convincing Dad that I didn't need his money, including specific talking points about my comfortable lifestyle and David's generous pension. She'd even written out responses to potential objections Dad might raise about fairness. "What are you doing?" I spun around. Elena stood in the doorway, her coffee cup trembling in her hand. Dad stirred, but didn't wake. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, holding up the letter. "Though I think this explains everything." Elena's face went through a series of expressions before settling on defiance. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You've been manipulating Dad while he's dying. I've been protecting our family's future, Elena hissed, moving closer but keeping her voice low. You have David's retirement, your savings, that nice house. I have nothing, Margaret, nothing. I sacrificed my career to take care of Mom, and now I'm sacrificing what's left of my life to take care of Dad. So, you decided to rewrite his will behind my back? I decided to help him see reality. Elena's eyes flashed with something between desperation and anger. You visit twice a week. I'm here every single day. You get to go home to your comfortable life while I'm watching him waste away, managing his medications, dealing with the doctors. For the first time, I heard the exhaustion in her voice, saw the dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Elena, if you needed help, if you were struggling financially, why didn't you just talk to me? Because you would have offered me charity, a loan, maybe a monthly allowance. Poor Elena can't take care of herself. She laughed bitterly. This way, I'm just getting what I've earned. By lying to him? By letting him see the truth. You don't need his money, Margaret. I do. Dad's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on both of us standing beside his bed. Girls, what's wrong? Elena immediately softened her expression, reaching for his hand. Nothing, Daddy. Margaret was just visiting. I looked at my father, so frail and trusting, then at Elena's expectant face. The weight of the documents in my hand felt enormous. Everything I said next would change our family forever. Dad, I began carefully. There's something we need to discuss about Elena and the will. Elena's face went pale, but before she could speak, Dad's lawyer walked into the room with a briefcase, followed closely by David. Sorry I'm late, David said, then stopped when he saw our faces. Have I interrupted something important? But what happened next revealed a secret that none of us had seen coming. The lawyer set his briefcase down and looked around the room, clearly sensing the tension. I apologize for the intrusion, but Elena called this morning and said there were some urgent changes that needed to be made to your will, Mr. Harrison. Dad looked confused, his eyes moving between Elena and me. Changes? I don't remember asking for any changes. Elena stepped forward quickly. Daddy, remember we talked about this yesterday? About making sure everything was fair and that Margaret wouldn't have to worry about taking care of the estate? I remember you talking, Dad said slowly, his voice gaining strength. But I never agreed to anything. David moved closer to my side, taking in the papers still clutched in my hand. What's going on, Margaret? I held up Elena's letter and the notes. Elena has been trying to convince Dad to write me out of his will completely. She had talking points prepared and everything. The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. Is this true, Ms. Elena? You called me under the pretense that your father had made this decision himself. Elena's composure finally cracked. He was going to make the decision. I was just helping him see that it made the most sense. Margaret doesn't need the money, and I've given up everything to take care of him. Elena, Dad said, his voice carrying a firmness I hadn't heard in months. Sit down. She perched reluctantly on the edge of the chair beside his bed. Margaret, you too. And David, thank you for being here. Dad struggled to sit up straighter, and David immediately moved to help adjust his pillows. I may be dying, but I'm not dead yet, and I'm certainly not incompetent. Dad, I never said you were incompetent, Elena protested. No, but you've been treating me like I am, making decisions for me, calling my lawyer without my permission, writing scripts for conversations you wanted to have with me. His eyes moved to the papers in my hand. May I see those? I handed them over, watching as Dad's expression grew more serious with each page. Elena, some of these arguments have merit. You have sacrificed a great deal to take care of your mother, and now me. But the way you've gone about this... He shook his head sadly. This isn't the daughter I raised. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I'm desperate, Daddy. I don't know what I'm going to do when you're gone. I have no career left, no savings, no prospects. Margaret has David's pension. Their house is paid off. She has investments. I'll have nothing. You'll have the house, Dad said gently. This house? I was planning to leave it to you anyway. Elena looked stunned. What? The house goes to Elena, and the investments and insurance get split between both girls, Dad explained to the lawyer, who was taking notes. That's what I've been planning for months. Elena gets the house she's been living in and taking care of, which is worth quite a bit, and both girls get equal shares of everything else. David squeezed my shoulder. That sounds more than fair. But Elena, Dad continued, if you had succeeded in manipulating me into changing my will, if Margaret hadn't caught you, I would have changed it. I would have left everything to Margaret and made sure you got nothing. The room fell silent except for Elena's quiet crying. I don't understand, she whispered. Because a person who would deceive and manipulate their dying father doesn't deserve to inherit anything from him, Dad said firmly. But the daughter who has genuinely cared for me, even though she made some very poor choices, does deserve something. Elena looked up at him, then at me. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I was just so scared. I know, I said, surprising myself with how much compassion I felt. But Elena, we're sisters. We could have figured this out together. Could we still? She asked tentatively. David cleared his throat. If I may suggest something, Elena, the house your father is leaving you is probably worth $200,000 or more. Margaret, if you're comfortable with it, maybe you could take a smaller share of the investments so things end up more even? I looked at my sister, seeing not the manipulative person who had shocked me an hour ago, but the frightened woman who had been carrying too much alone for too long. Actually, I said slowly, I have a different idea. What if we kept the will exactly as Dad planned? But Elena, what if you moved into the house and we turned it into a rental property together? You could manage it, live there, and we could split the rental income. It would give you steady income and a place to live. Elena stared at me. You would do that? After what I just tried to do? You're my sister. And Dad's right. You have sacrificed a lot. The lawyer was scribbling notes furiously when Dad suddenly grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Margaret, he said urgently, there's something else. Something I haven't told either of you girls yet. His grip tightened, and I saw fear in his eyes for the first time since his diagnosis. The house isn't the only thing I haven't been completely honest about. My heart started racing at the fear in Dad's voice. Elena immediately sat up straighter, her tears forgotten for the moment. What do you mean, Dad? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dad looked between Elena and me, then at David, who had gone very still beside me. The medical bills, Dad said quietly. They've been much higher than I told you girls. Much higher. Elena frowned. But you said the insurance was covering most of it. It is, but the deductibles, the experimental treatments that insurance won't touch, the medications... Dad's voice trailed off. I've been paying for them by borrowing against the house. The lawyer looked up from his notes, clearly uncomfortable with this revelation. How much? I asked, dreading the answer. About $60,000 so far, Dad admitted. And with the treatments I still need, it could go up to $100,000 or more. Elena's face went white. Dad, why didn't you tell us? I've been living there. I could have helped with payments, gotten a second job. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, Dad said firmly. You were already doing enough. And Margaret, you were dealing with your own problems. David cleared his throat. So the house that's worth $200,000 might have $100,000 in liens against it? Dad nodded miserably. The lawyer here has been helping me navigate it, but yes. That beautiful house Elena's been taking care of might not be worth nearly what we thought. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. All our planning, all our calculations about fair distribution had just been turned upside down. So when you leave Elena the house, I said slowly, you're also leaving her with potentially crushing debt. The payments are manageable as long as I'm alive and receiving treatment, Dad explained. But once I'm gone, the loans come due, all of them. Elena buried her face in her hands. Oh my God, no wonder you were talking about changing the will. You weren't just cutting me out, you were protecting me from financial ruin. That was part of it, Dad admitted. David was doing calculations in his head. I could tell by the way his brow was furrowed. What about the investments and insurance money? Would that be enough to pay off the liens? Most of it, yes, the lawyer interjected, but it would leave very little for actual inheritance. The room fell silent as we all processed this information. All of Elena's scheming, all of my anger, all of our hurt feelings, and it turned out the real issue was that there might not be much to inherit anyway. Why didn't you just tell us this from the beginning? Elena asked, her voice thick with emotion. Because I didn't want my last months with my daughters to be about money and debt, Dad said. I wanted them to be about family. I reached over and took Elena's hand. Well, they still can be. But Margaret, don't you see what this means? Elena said desperately. If I inherit the house, I inherit crushing debt I can't pay. If you inherit the investments to pay my debt, you get nothing. Either way, one of us gets destroyed financially. David shifted in his chair. Unless you both work together to find a third option? What do you mean? I asked. Well, what if neither of you inherits the house directly? What if your father's estate sells it, pays off all the medical debt, and then you split whatever's left plus the insurance money? The lawyer looked up with interest. That's actually not a bad idea from a legal standpoint. It would simplify everything considerably. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Girls, what do you think? I know the house has sentimental value, especially for Elena. Elena was crying again, but this time it seemed like tears of relief. Dad, I don't care about the house if it means Margaret and I don't have to spend the rest of our lives resenting each other over money. And I don't want you buried under debt you can't handle, I added. So we sell the house, pay off Dad's medical bills, and split what's left? Elena asked. It seems like the fairest solution, I agreed. The lawyer was taking notes again when Dad suddenly gripped the arms of his chair. Actually, girls, before we finalize anything, Dad's breathing had become labored. There's one more thing. About your mother. Something I promised her I'd never tell you, but something you need to know before I'm gone. Elena and I exchanged worried glances as Dad's face went pale. Elena immediately moved to Dad's side, placing her hand on his shoulder. Dad, are you okay? Should we take a break? No, Dad said, waving us off but still looking strained. I need to say this now. I've been carrying it for too long, and with everything that's happened today, about the will and the money, you girls deserve to know the truth. I felt my stomach tighten. After all the revelations we'd already had today, I wasn't sure I could handle another bombshell. Dad, what about Mom? David leaned forward slightly, his legal instincts clearly kicking in. Mr. Harrison, are you sure you want to discuss this now? You seem tired, and we could always schedule another meeting. David, with respect, I might not have another meeting, Dad said bluntly. My daughters need to hear this. Elena sat back down, but kept her chair pulled close to Dad. Okay, we're listening. Dad took a shaky breath. Your mother didn't just die from cancer. I mean, she did, but there's more to it. She had a chance for an experimental treatment. It was expensive, not covered by insurance, but it might have given her more time. Why didn't you do it? I asked, though something in my gut was already telling me I didn't want to know the answer. We didn't have the money, Dad said quietly. We'd already mortgaged the house twice for her previous treatments. We'd maxed out credit cards, borrowed against my retirement. The experimental treatment would have cost another $100,000. Elena's face went white. Dad, you're not saying what I think you're saying, are you? I am, Dad replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I chose to save our financial future, instead of potentially saving your mother's life. And she supported that decision. The room went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on David's wall, could hear cars passing outside, could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. That's why you've been so weird about money and debt, I said, the pieces clicking into place. That's why you were willing to saddle Elena with the house debt, but not me. You think you killed Mom by choosing money over her treatment? Margaret, Elena said sharply, but Dad held up his hand. No, she's right. That's exactly what I think. Every day for the past 3 years, I've wondered if I made the right choice. Your mother said she didn't want to leave you girls with crushing debt, that she'd rather have a shorter life knowing you'd be financially stable. But I've never forgiven myself for listening to her. David cleared his throat carefully. Mr. Harrison, experimental treatments aren't guaranteed. Even if you'd found the money, there's no certainty it would have helped. I know that logically, Dad said. But emotionally, I feel like I killed my wife to protect money that I'm losing anyway to medical bills. Elena was crying again, but this time she looked angry. Dad, how could you carry this alone? How could you not tell us? What was I supposed to say? Girls, I let your mother die because I was worried about debt? How do you have that conversation? I stood up and started pacing David's office. This is insane. Mom would have made the same choice. You know she would have. She was always the practical one, always thinking about our future. You don't know that for certain, Dad replied. Yes, I do, I said firmly. And you know why? Because when I was in college and got that emergency appendectomy, Mom fought the hospital for 6 months over the bill. She said she wasn't going to let them bankrupt our family over one medical event. She was fierce about protecting us from medical debt. Elena nodded slowly. And when I wanted to drop out of community college because we couldn't afford it, Mom took that second job at the grocery store. She said education and financial stability were the best gifts she could give us. So why would she suddenly change her mind about that when it came to her own treatment? I asked Dad directly. David had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Mr. Harrison, it sounds like your wife was consistent in her values. She prioritized your family's long-term financial stability over short-term medical spending, even when it came to herself. Dad's shoulders sagged. But what if I was wrong? What if I should have fought harder to find the money somehow? Then you would have lost Mom anyway, and Elena and I would be drowning in debt right now instead of just dealing with your medical bills, I said. Dad, You made the choice Mom wanted you to make, the choice she helped you make. Elena reached over and took Dad's hand. And now you're doing the same thing with your own medical debt. You're trying to protect us financially, even though it means making impossible choices about who gets what in the will. I never thought about it like that, Dad admitted. Well, start thinking about it like that, I said, sitting back down. Because Elena and I just figured out how to handle your medical debt together, and we can honor Mom's memory by actually accepting her values instead of drowning in guilt over them. David looked between all of us. So are we moving forward with the plan to sell the house and split the remaining assets? Elena and I looked at each other, then at Dad. Yes, Elena said. But Dad, I need you to promise me something first. What's that? Promise me you'll stop punishing yourself for respecting Mom's wishes. She made that choice with you, not just for you. Dad was quiet for a long moment. I can try. Good, I said, because we've got paperwork to handle, and I need you mentally present for it, not lost in 3 years of guilt. David started pulling out fresh documents when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Elena asked. It's a message from the hospital's billing department, David said slowly. They want to schedule a meeting about your father's account. Apparently, there's been some kind of irregularity discovered in the payment processing. Dad's face went ashen. What kind of irregularity? David set his phone down slowly, his expression shifting from confused to concerned. The message doesn't give details. It just says there's been an irregularity in the payment processing for your account, and they need to meet with you to discuss it. What does that even mean? Elena asked, her voice tight. An irregularity? We've been making the minimum payments on time. Dad's hands started shaking slightly. Maybe they made a mistake in their system, or maybe someone else's account got mixed up with mine. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Or maybe it's something worse. David, when do they want to meet? Tomorrow afternoon, David replied, scrolling through the message. They're asking for Mr. Harrison to come in person, and they suggest bringing legal representation. Legal representation? Dad's voice cracked. I can't afford legal representation. That's the whole point of why we're sitting here dividing up what little I have left. Elena leaned forward, studying Dad's face. Dad, is there anything you haven't told us about the medical bills? Any payments you might have missed or any arrangements you made that we don't know about? No, nothing like that. Dad shook his head emphatically. I've been obsessive about keeping track of every payment, every statement, every phone call. After what happened with your mother's medical bills, I document everything. David tapped his pen against his notepad. Mr. Harrison, walk us through exactly how you've been handling the payments. Maybe we can figure out what might have triggered this. Dad took a deep breath. I set up automatic payments from my checking account for the minimum amount due each month. It comes out on the 15th. I get a confirmation email every time it processes, and I save every single one of them. Have you gotten confirmation emails for all the recent payments? I asked. Yes, every month. The last one was just 2 weeks ago. Dad paused, looking uncertain. Although, now that I think about it, the amount seemed lower than usual, but I figured maybe they had adjusted something in my favor for once. Elena and I exchanged looks. Dad, how much lower? Elena asked. Maybe $50 or $60 less than the previous months. I thought maybe they had finally processed some insurance adjustment that had been pending. David was writing notes rapidly. Mr. Harrison, do you still have those confirmation emails? Of course. I keep them all in a folder on my computer. We need to look at those tonight, I said firmly. Before we go to that meeting tomorrow, we need to understand exactly what's been happening with your account. Elena stood up and started pacing. This is exactly what we don't need right now. We finally had a plan to handle Dad's debts responsibly. And now, there's some mystery problem with the payments. Elena, sit down, I said. Pacing isn't going to solve anything. Neither is sitting here speculating about what might be wrong. Elena stopped pacing, but remained standing. David, what's the worst-case scenario here? David hesitated. Well, if there's been some kind of error in the payment processing, they might claim that payments weren't received properly. That could mean additional fees, penalties, or even acceleration of the full debt amount. Dad's face went completely white. Acceleration? What does that mean? It means they could demand the entire balance be paid immediately instead of allowing you to continue with monthly payments. David explained gently. But I can't pay the entire balance immediately, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. If they demand that, I'll have to declare bankruptcy, and then there won't be anything left for either of you. I reached over and put my hand on Dad's arm. Dad, we don't know that's what this is about. Let's not panic until we have actual information. Elena finally sat back down, but she was clearly agitated. You know what? I'm coming with you to that meeting tomorrow. Elena, you don't need to do that, Dad started. Yes, I do. You shouldn't have to face this alone, and besides, this affects me too. If there's a problem with your medical debt, it impacts everything we just spent 2 hours planning. I'm coming too, I said immediately. David looked at all of us. I think that's actually a good idea. The more people there are to ask questions and take notes, the better. And if this is some kind of error on their part, having witnesses to the conversation could be important. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. You know, for a few minutes there, I actually felt hopeful. Like maybe we had figured out a way to handle everything responsibly and still take care of both of you. We still might have, Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. Right, Dad said bitterly. Or tomorrow we find out that some computer glitch is going to destroy the last bit of financial security I have left to pass on to you. I could see him starting to spiral into that dark place again. Dad, stop. We're going to handle whatever this is, just like we handled figuring out how to split your assets fairly. We're a team now, remember? But what if it's something I did wrong? What if I made some mistake with the payments, and now it's going to cost you both everything? David cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, even if there was some mistake in the payment processing, that doesn't necessarily mean it was your fault. Hospital billing systems are notoriously complex, and errors happen frequently. Easy for you to say, Dad muttered. It's not your life savings on the line. Elena leaned forward and took Dad's other hand. Dad, it's going to be okay. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. But I need you to promise me you're not going to spend the next 24 hours imagining worst-case scenarios. How can I not? This feels like when your mother first got sick, and we thought the insurance would cover everything, and then we found out about all the exclusions and limitations. I squeezed Dad's arm tighter. This isn't the same situation, Dad. We're going into that meeting prepared and together. We're not going to be blindsided. David's phone buzzed again, and we all tensed. He glanced at it and frowned deeper. What now? Elena asked, her voice sharp with anxiety. It's another message from the hospital, David said slowly. They're asking if you can meet first thing in the morning instead of tomorrow afternoon. They say it's urgent. The word urgent hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I watched Dad's face drain of what little color it had regained during our planning session. Urgent, Dad repeated flatly. Of course it's urgent. Nothing good is ever urgent when it comes to hospitals. Dad, please don't jump to conclusions, Elena said, but I could hear the worry creeping into her voice despite her attempt to stay calm. David was still staring at his phone. They're saying the billing department needs to discuss some discrepancies they've found in your account, and that waiting until afternoon could complicate the resolution process. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. They don't specify, just that they need to review your payment history and current balance immediately. Dad pushed himself up from his chair with more force than necessary. This is it. This is how it all falls apart. 24 hours ago, Sarah was trying to convince me to cut you out of my will completely, and now some billing error is going to do it for her. That's not going to happen, Elena said firmly, standing up as well. And can we please stop bringing up what I did? I'm trying to make this right. Are you? Dad turned to face her directly. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like every time we take a step forward, something else goes wrong. First, you're manipulating me when I'm barely coherent from pain medication. Then we spend hours figuring out how to fix the damage you caused. And now this. Elena's face flushed. You think I somehow caused a hospital billing error? You think I called them up and told them to create problems with your account? I don't know what to think anymore, Dad said, his voice rising. A week ago, I thought I knew both my daughters. I thought I understood what was happening with my medical bills. I thought I had some control over my own life. You do have control, I interjected, stepping between them. This is exactly what Sarah was doing, Dad. She was making you feel powerless so you'd make decisions based on fear instead of thinking clearly. Elena shot me a grateful look, but Dad wasn't having it. Don't psychoanalyze me right now, he snapped, and don't pretend this isn't a disaster. If there's some massive error in my account, if they've been applying payments incorrectly, or if there's interest accruing that I didn't know about, everything we just planned becomes meaningless. David cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, I understand why you're upset, but we don't actually know what the problem is yet. It could be something simple, like a clerical error that works in your favor. When has anything about this whole situation worked in anyone's favor? Dad asked bitterly. Well, for starters, we caught Elena before you actually changed your will, I pointed out. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, you might have signed papers that you'd regret for the rest of your life. Elena winced, but nodded. She's right. And we caught it early enough that we could sit down and actually talk through everything rationally. Rationally, Dad repeated. Right. Is it rational that I can't trust my own judgment anymore? Is it rational that I'm terrified to go to a simple meeting about my medical bills because I'm afraid it's going to bankrupt me? I moved closer to Dad and put my hand on his shoulder. It's rational to be scared when you're dealing with a serious illness and major financial concerns. But it's not rational to assume the worst-case scenario is definitely going to happen. Isn't it? Look at the pattern here. My health gets worse, my thinking gets muddled, Sarah convinces me to make terrible decisions, we figure out how to fix the terrible decisions, and then something else goes wrong. Elena sat back down heavily. So what do you want to do? Do you want to skip the meeting and pretend the problem doesn't exist? I want to wake up 6 months ago when the biggest problem in my life was deciding whether to get the extended warranty on my new car, Dad said. David stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. You know what I think we should do? I think we should call them back and ask for more specific information about what they need to discuss. Will they tell us? I asked. They might. If Mr. Harrison authorizes me to speak on his behalf, I can at least try to get some basic information about the nature of the discrepancy. That way we're not walking in completely blind tomorrow morning. Dad looked at David for a long moment. You'd be willing to do that? Of course. That's why I'm here. Elena leaned forward. Dad, I think that's a good idea. Even if they can't tell us everything, knowing whether we're talking about hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars would help. Or tens of thousands, Dad muttered. Or maybe they owe you money, I said. Maybe they double-charged you for something, and they're calling because they need to issue a refund. Dad looked at me like I'd suggested he might sprout wings and fly. When in the history of medical billing has a hospital ever called to say they owe the patient money? It happens more than you'd think, David said, turning back from the window. Especially with insurance adjustments and payment processing delays. Sometimes payments get applied to the wrong account, or insurance pays more than expected, or there are billing code errors that result in overcharges. So, you really think this could be good news? Dad asked, and for the first time in the last 20 minutes, he sounded hopeful rather than defeated. I think it could be anything, David said honestly. But I also think we'll all sleep better tonight if we have at least some idea of what we're walking into tomorrow. Elena pulled out her phone. What's the number? I'll call them right now and get Dad authorized to have David speak for him. Wait, Dad said suddenly. What if asking for more information makes things worse somehow? What if they weren't planning to bring up certain issues, but then our questions remind them to check other parts of my account? I stared at him. Dad, that's not how this works. They already have your complete account information. They're not going to suddenly discover new problems, because David asks what the meeting is about. But what if... Stop, Elena interrupted. Just stop. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep imagining every possible way things could go wrong. It's paralyzing you, and it's making all of us crazy. Dad looked startled by her tone. I know I don't have the right to tell you how to handle this situation, given what I tried to do, Elena continued. But watching you torture yourself with hypothetical disasters is killing me, and it's not helping anything. So, what do you suggest? Dad asked quietly. I suggest we make the phone call, we get whatever information we can, and then we spend the rest of the evening doing something completely unrelated to medical bills or wills or any of this mess. David was already dialing. Mr. Harrison, when they answer, just tell them you want to authorize me to discuss your account and then hand me the phone. Dad nodded, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. St. Mary's Hospital Billing Department. This is Robert Harrison, Dad said, his voice steadier than I'd expected. I received a message asking me to come in for an urgent meeting tomorrow morning, and I'd like to authorize my representative to get some basic information about what you need to discuss. There was a pause. Can you hold for just a moment, Mr. Harrison? Sure, Dad said, but he looked at the rest of us with panic in his eyes. The hold music seemed to go on forever. Finally, a different voice came on the line. Mr. Harrison, this is Janet Mitchell, the billing department supervisor. I'm glad you called back so quickly. We've discovered some serious irregularities in your account that require immediate attention. Dad's face went completely white at the word irregularities, and I watched him grip the phone so tightly, his knuckles looked like they might break through his skin. What kind of irregularities? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Well, Mr. Harrison, I'd prefer to discuss this in person tomorrow, but since you're asking, we found some discrepancies in your payment history and insurance claims that don't match our records. There also appear to be some charges that were processed incorrectly, and frankly, some that shouldn't have been processed at all. Elena leaned forward, her eyes wide. Does that mean what I think it means? Dad held up a hand to shush her, but Janet Mitchell continued talking. I don't want to get your hopes up too much over the phone, Mr. Harrison, but our preliminary review suggests you may have been significantly overcharged for several procedures. We're also seeing duplicate billings that were never caught by our system. I felt my heart start beating faster. Dad, ask her how much we're talking about. I heard that, Janet said with what sounded like a smile in her voice. Mr. Harrison, would you like to authorize whoever is there with you to discuss this directly? It might be easier. Yes, absolutely, Dad said immediately. This is my son David. He's been helping me with all of this. Perfect. David, are you there? David took the phone. I'm here. Can you give us any sense of the scope of what you found? Well, like I said, we're still reviewing everything, but so far we've identified approximately $47,000 in erroneous charges. Some were duplicate billings, some were procedures that were coded incorrectly and charged at much higher rates, and some appear to have been charged to your father's account by mistake entirely. Elena grabbed my arm so hard I was sure she'd leave bruises. Did she just say 47,000? That's just what we've found so far, Janet continued. We're meeting tomorrow because we need to go through everything with your father, make sure our corrections are accurate, and discuss how we're going to handle the refund process. Dad sank back in his chair like all the air had been let out of him. Refund process? Yes, sir. For the duplicate charges and the incorrectly coded procedures, you'll be receiving a direct refund. For the charges that were applied to your account in error, we'll be removing those entirely and working with your insurance company to make sure everything is properly documented. I stared at Dad, then at Elena, then at David, trying to process what we were hearing. So when you said this was urgent, David said slowly, you meant urgent because you wanted to fix this as quickly as possible, not because Dad was in trouble? Oh, goodness, no, Janet said, and I could hear her laughing slightly. I'm so sorry if our message sounded threatening. We marked it as urgent because we know how stressful medical bills can be, and we wanted to get this resolved for your father as soon as possible. We've actually been trying to reach him for over a week. Elena buried her face in her hands. We've been panicking for nothing. Not for nothing, Dad said quietly. We still don't know how much this is going to help in the long run. Dad, I said, if they're giving you back almost $50,000, that changes everything. That's more than half of what you owe. Janet, David said into the phone, is there any chance the review will find more issues, or is 47,000 roughly what we're looking at? Well, we're not done with our review yet. The 47,000 is just from the most obvious errors. Our full audit should be completed by tomorrow morning, so we'll have final numbers for you then. After David finished the call and handed the phone back to Dad, we all just sat there in silence for a long moment. I don't understand, Dad finally said. How do these kinds of mistakes happen? The same way any mistakes happen, Elena said. Someone enters a wrong code, or bills get mixed up, or the system glitches and processes the same payment twice. It's not malicious, Dad. It's just human error. But shouldn't someone have caught it sooner? Probably, I said. But think about it from their perspective. They process thousands of bills every month. Unless someone complains or specifically asks them to review an account, they probably don't have the staff to double-check everything. David nodded. And honestly, most people probably do complain when they see charges this high. You're unusual in that you just accepted what they told you and tried to figure out how to pay it. So, if I had called them months ago and asked them to review the charges, you might have gotten this resolved already, Elena said gently. But Dad, you can't beat yourself up about that now. You are dealing with cancer treatment and recovery. The last thing on your mind should have been auditing hospital bills. Dad was quiet for another minute, and I could practically see him processing everything. "So what happens now?" he asked eventually. "Now we go to the meeting tomorrow, we get the final numbers, and we figure out what your actual remaining balance is," David said. "And then?" I looked at Elena, then at David. "And then maybe we can start talking about something other than medical bills and wills for a while?" Dad almost smiled at that. "That would be nice." "There's just one thing," Elena said, and her voice had gotten serious again. We all looked at her. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay." "When I was trying to convince you to change your will, when I was telling you how unfair it would be to leave Margaret with all this debt, did any part of you actually want to do it? Even a small part?" Dad was quiet for so long, I started to think he wasn't going to answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "I was so scared and so tired of feeling like such a burden on everyone. There were moments when it seemed like it might be easier for both of you if Margaret didn't have to deal with any of this." "But that's not the same as actually wanting me to inherit nothing," I said. "No," Dad said firmly. "That's not what I wanted. I just wanted to stop feeling like I was destroying your future." Elena nodded slowly. "Okay, that's what I thought, but I needed to hear you say it. Why?" "Because," Elena said, "I need to know that when I was pressuring you, I was asking you to do something you genuinely didn't want to do. I need to know that I was actually manipulating you, not just giving you permission to do something you already wanted to do anyway." David frowned. "Why is that important?" "Because if he actually wanted to change the will, then what I did wasn't manipulation, it was just encouragement. But if he didn't want to change it, if I was trying to convince him to do something that went against his actual wishes, then what I did was much worse." I stared at her. "Elena, why are you torturing yourself with this?" "Because I need to understand exactly how wrong I was so I can figure out how to make sure I never do anything like it again." But before any of us could respond to that, Dad's phone rang again. Elena looked at the phone screen and silenced the ring. "It's probably David's office," she said, "but we're not done with this conversation." I watched her decline the call, struck by how different she seemed now compared to just days ago. The Elena who had been systematically working to convince Dad to cut me out of his will would never have ignored a call that might have been about business or logistics. She would have jumped on it, used it as a way to redirect the conversation away from uncomfortable emotional territory. "Elena," I said slowly, "I need to understand something too." She looked at me expectantly. "When you were doing all of this, when you were building that whole case about the medical debt and how unfair it would be to me, did you actually believe what you were saying? Or did you know the whole time that you were manipulating the situation?" Dad shifted in his chair, and I could tell he was listening intently, even though this was really between Elena and me. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I told myself I believed it," she said finally. "I convinced myself that I was looking out for your best interests, but honestly, deep down, I think I knew I was being manipulative. I just didn't want to admit it to myself." "Why not?" "Because it's easier to be manipulative when you can pretend you're being noble." Elena looked down at her hands. "If I had acknowledged what I was really doing, I would have had to stop. And I didn't want to stop because I wanted what I wanted." David had been listening quietly, but now he leaned forward. "What changed? What made you stop?" "Margaret confronting me," Elena said immediately. "When she walked in and heard me talking to Dad about the will when she looked at me like I was a stranger. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep lying to myself about what I was doing. I felt something shift in my chest. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like I was actually seeing my sister clearly. Not the version of her I had been afraid of, not the version she had been pretending to be, but the actual Elena, who was capable of both manipulation and genuine remorse. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I mean, after we deal with the medical bills and everything gets sorted out, what happens with us?" Elena looked directly at me. "I don't know. I hope we can figure out how to be sisters again, but I understand if you don't trust me anymore." "I don't," I said honestly, "but I want to." Dad cleared his throat. "Can I say something?" We all turned to him. "I've been sitting here listening to you two talk about trust and manipulation and making amends, and I keep thinking about something." Dad paused, looking between Elena and me. "Elena, what you did was wrong. We all know that. But Margaret, I think you need to hear this too." "Okay." The reason Elena's manipulation worked, even temporarily, wasn't just because I was scared or tired or overwhelmed by the medical bills. Dad's voice was steady, but serious. "It worked because I've been carrying guilt about both of you for years." "What do you mean?" Elena asked. "I mean, I've always wondered if I did enough for either of you. If I was present enough when you were growing up. If I supported your dreams enough. If I prepared you well enough for adult life." Dad looked at me. "Margaret, you've always been so responsible, so capable of handling things on your own. Sometimes I worried that I took that for granted, that I didn't give you enough support because you seemed like you didn't need it." I felt tears starting. "Dad, you were a great father." "And Elena," Dad continued, turning to her, "you've always been the one who needed more guidance, more structure. Sometimes I worried that I failed you by not pushing you harder to be more independent, more self-sufficient." Elena was crying now. "Dad, don't." "My point is," Dad said, "that Elena was able to convince me to consider changing the will because she was playing on fears and guilt I already had. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it means this isn't entirely about her manipulation. It's also about me not trusting my own judgment as a father." David nodded slowly. "So you're saying that part of moving forward means you need to stop second-guessing yourself about how you raise them?" "Exactly." Dad looked at both Elena and me. "And it means you both need to stop carrying guilt about things that were never your responsibility to begin with." Before any of us could respond, Elena's phone started ringing. She glanced at it, and her expression changed completely. "It's the hospital," she said, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. "They said they'd only call if there was an emergency with the billing situation." Elena stared at her phone, her face pale. The ringtone seemed unusually loud in our suddenly quiet living room. "Answer it," Dad said gently. She swiped to accept the call. "Hello? Yes, this is Elena Morrison." She listened for a moment, and I watched her expression shift from anxiety to confusion. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" David, Dad, and I waited in tense silence as Elena continued listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, I think there's been some mistake," Elena said into the phone. "I never authorized any payment plan changes." She paused again, listening. "What do you mean the account shows recent activity?" My stomach dropped. "Elena, what's going on?" She held up a finger, still focused on the call. "Can you tell me exactly what changes were made and when?" Another pause. Yesterday? No, that's impossible. I was here all day yesterday. Dad struggled to sit up straighter in his chair. Elena, put it on speaker. Elena fumbled with the phone controls, and suddenly we could all hear a crisp female voice. As I was saying, Ms. Morrison, our records show that yesterday at 2:47 p.m., someone called from this number and requested to modify the payment plan for account number ending in 4729. They provided the correct Social Security number and date of birth for verification. But I didn't make that call, Elena insisted, looking frantically between the three of us. What kind of changes? The caller requested to split the remaining balance into smaller monthly payments over a longer term, which will increase the total amount due but reduce the immediate financial pressure. The caller mentioned that the family was experiencing additional financial hardship. Elena's face went white. I never said that. I never called you. David leaned forward. Excuse me, this is David Chen, the family's attorney. Can you tell us what number the call came from? I'm not authorized to discuss account details with anyone other than the account holder or designated contact. That's fine, Elena said quickly. David is helping us with some legal matters. Please, I need to understand what happened. The call came from the number I'm calling now. The caller identified herself as Elena Morrison and provided all the correct verification information. I felt my heart pounding. Elena, where were you yesterday at 2:47? I was here, Elena said, her voice shaking. I was sitting right here with Dad, remember? We were watching that cooking show and you were at work and David was... She trailed off, looking confused. David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. Elena, can you check your call history from yesterday afternoon? With trembling fingers, Elena navigated to her call log. There's nothing here. No outgoing calls to any hospital or billing department. The voice on the speaker continued. I understand this is confusing, Ms. Morrison, but our records are very clear. The call came from your number, and all the verification information was correct. Dad was looking back and forth between all of us, his expression troubled. Elena, is it possible you made the call and just forgot? With everything that's been happening lately? No, Dad. I swear I didn't make any call. Elena looked desperate. Margaret, you believe me, right? I wanted to believe her, but after everything that had happened with the will situation, doubt was creeping in. Elena, I don't know what to think anymore. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Elena said, tears starting to flow again. Now, every time something goes wrong, you're going to assume I'm lying or manipulating something. David held up his hand. Let's not jump to conclusions. There could be several explanations for this. He addressed the phone. Is there any way to verify the actual phone number the call originated from? Not just the number that appeared on your caller ID. I would need to check with our technical department about that level of detail. Can I call you back? Yes, please, Elena said. But I'm telling you, I didn't make that call. After Elena hung up, we sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Okay, David said finally. Let's think about this logically. Either Elena made the call and doesn't remember it, Elena made the call and isn't telling us, or someone else made the call using her information. How would someone else get all my verification information? Elena asked. The same way you got Dad's information when you were planning to change his will, I said quietly. Elena's face crumpled. So you think I'm lying? I think, Dad said carefully, that we need more information before we decide anything. Elena, if you didn't make this call, then we need to figure out who did and how. But what if Margaret's right? Elena asked. What if I did make the call and I'm just so used to manipulating things that I don't even remember doing it anymore. The raw vulnerability in her voice made my chest tight. Despite everything, seeing my sister question her own reality was painful. "Elena, look at me," I said. She raised her tear-filled eyes to meet mine. "Do you remember making the call?" "No, I swear I don't remember making any call." "Then we figure out what really happened," I said. "Because even though I don't trust you completely yet, I don't think you'd lie about something we could so easily verify." David nodded. "We'll wait for them to call back with more technical details. In the meantime, Elena, I want you to check all your accounts, passwords, everything. Make sure no one else has access to your phone or personal information." "You really think someone else could have done this?" Elena asked hopefully. "I think," Dad said, "that after today's conversation about trust and making amends, it would be pretty strange timing for you to immediately do something deceptive again. Plus," I added, "when you were manipulating the will situation, you were secretive about it. Why would you call the hospital and then immediately tell us about the call if you were trying to hide something?" Elena's shoulders sagged with relief. "So you believe me?" "I believe that we need to find out the truth," I said. "And I believe that you deserve the benefit of the doubt while we do that." It wasn't complete trust yet, but it was a start.